Good morning, everybody. This is the second episode of Date with Destiny. Today's Tuesday, March 29. It's 11:35 a.m. here at Club Dub Studio. We were limited in choices for special guests today, so we have a repeat appearance from Loki and Cairo. And they may have something to say here or there during the show. And we promise not to censor them. Unlike the big tech giants. One of the things that we wanted to talk about this morning. Oh, first, let me introduce my co-host, Destiny.
Hi, my name is Destiny, and I'm a bartender.
And a congressional candidate for the year 2024.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's Loki.
And that's Loki, who is normally very shy, but he's aware when we're live.
Oh, yeah. So
he has a certain sense about things like that. And again, we're not going to take his voice away like what kind of happens here in the big tech. We're in the Silicon Valley. We're in the Tri-Valley in Dublin, California. And we're just right in the middle of where all the evil of big tech dominates our social lives and our social credit scores.
Oh, yeah.
And for example, our very first show, normally you can talk about, our first show got banned by CIA, Google, and their screw tube, or the emphasis can be different where you say our first show got banned by screw tube and the CIA, Google. And in this case, both would be right. So if you're hearing our previous show, it's probably on our SoundCloud. And if you're hearing this one, we'll see how it goes. This will be posted to ScrewTube because we remain committed to not be directed by such pressures as and obligations to the thought authority that dominates all of social media today, and what I like to call the social media Taliban. Now, we had a potential guest today that may be discussing some of his own nightmare stories with deplatforming. And I personally have spent 2 years in the Facebook gulag collectively in 30-day installments. And just so you know, I had absolutely no problem with Facebook from 2007 when I joined until about 2017. And then that's when they discovered that free speech could be inconvenient to certain agendas, and started to adopt the emerging millennial position on that. And I'll let you comment on that. But last I looked at specifications or statistics or survey results, 40% of millennials now believe that free speech is oppression.
Really? That's interesting. I mean, I know many people within my age range, give or take 5 years, who actually believe that free speech is dangerous. I've had conversations with many people who believe that safety is more important than free speech. And it's not easy to get anywhere in these conversations. Let's just say it's always a agree to disagree kind of take. There's never any convincing them otherwise.
Yeah, and it's quite unfortunate because without, the same left that bangs on the drum day and night about one man, one vote, one child, one vote, one dog, one vote, whatever they want voting to secure the benefits of democracy and the mob rule of the 51%, are the same ones that think suppression of what people might say before they go to vote is a good idea.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's no right... this is a little off of conventional wisdom, but the Bill of Rights really makes mention of every single one of our fundamental human rights, and there's no mention of voting in there. It's become perceived as the essential and the most essential right of all, when in fact it's a tool for the people that drive the media and influence, basically provide all the opinions through TV sets, academia, and social media to multiply their own vote So people don't understand that uninformed voting that's directed by a TV set is basically taking power from the people in their essential rights that were hard fought in sweat and blood, to give it back to the elite overlords. And that's why most every election runs like a catalog shopper. They basically go into the poll like it's a Sears catalog and say, I'd like this, this, and that, and I'd like it to come from my neighbor that seems to have too much.
This was all designed on purpose. The problem that I see with incentivizing younger people to vote, like here in California, they actually want to bring the voting age down to 16. The problem I see with that is an educated vote is more important than an uneducated vote. And I know that sounds cruel, but when you are just allowing anyone who is impressionable and younger to vote, I feel like it takes away from those who are educated and actually do their research. And that's kind of what you mean when you said, oh, we're allowing people who are sitting in front of the TV box. That's basically just giving thousands of votes to the elites. Because, and I'm not trying to sound rude or mean or hostile, but yeah, people who sit in front of the TV all day who don't actually put any research into who or what they're voting for, their votes are basically being thrown towards the elites, because all of that information is information that the elites want them to know, want them to think. It's not like a free and to me, it's not a free and fair election.
Well, and in fact, the damage that they're able to do by high turnout is exacerbated, of course, by the systemic and structural Dem vote fraud. And we haven't had an honest election here in California since maybe that 2006 or prior. But nonetheless, the idea that voting is the ultimate right is absurd, because rights are smashed with every election.
Voting is a privilege, not a right. When I was in high school, I remember specifically learning that voting was a privilege for all of us, not a right. And that privilege can be taken away if you do certain things and end up losing the privilege, like ending up as a felon or with certain charges. You know, not every individual has the right to vote. And don't get it twisted. I'm not trying to say that every individual doesn't and shouldn't have the right to vote, but voting is a privilege. Well,
it's the privilege is a favorite word also that the left likes to use, and they describe it, they use it, they apply it to things that are better described as American privilege, that are basically the things that we get to do that 95% of the population of the earth might not be able to enjoy.
Yeah.
And most of those are in the fundamental human rights that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution, such as the First Amendment, which, that's right, free speech, which is now problematic for the left. The Second Amendment, self-defense, which is hugely problematic for the left. Lunch? No, it's not even that time yet. So anyway, but nonetheless, one thing that's kind of amazing is that all of those that think it's okay for everyone to leverage authority over their neighbors through a vote also are the ones that think it's not okay to have the necessary discourse that is a prelude to informed voting. And that's on social media platforms. That's the public square of the modern day. And it's also true in the controlled print media, where they basically are all owned by the same conglomerates and
Microsoft,
corporates that all
Apple.
go back to the top. Oh, and I'm glad you mentioned that. In addition to having, I had a busy week last week. I had our shows taken off the airs of YouTube within 6 hours of posting. And then I also had the joyous experience of checking into my LinkedIn. And there I had discovered a couple weeks prior. And there I discovered that my account was removed from LinkedIn.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Now, most people didn't think about the horrifying implications when they took down Alex Jones off all platforms. But even at that time, I observed, gee, they took his LinkedIn account down. So if good old Alex Jones decided, you know what, this whole political business is just, kind of boring for me now. It's too much headache, not worth it. I'm just going to go get like a straight job at the Amazon. And so he's been taken, his ability to do that's taken away because he can't even post a resume or maintain his professional contacts on LinkedIn. Now, I've been a celebrated employee in Silicon Valley and in tech specifically since the 90s. My first tech job was in the 80s. Actually, my first job at all was at IBM when I was 16. But I had worked at Viewpoint Engineering in Mountain View. Then I went on to work at Seiko Instruments for 8.5 years. I received accolades from my employer, including at least one Employee of the Year, and several other awards for my apparent concern for the product and the reputation of the company. So this was years before LinkedIn even existed. And so now today, all of my professional contacts are held hostage, and the entire history of a career has been basically scrubbed with no access to anybody. There's also a defamation aspect of it. It's like, oh, gee, this guy's taken off LinkedIn, and we can't take this guy seriously. So what was previously presented to us fraudulently as a career development site that we trusted with our most proprietary secrets of professional contacts and professional history is now acting as an agent of the social media Taliban that's doing depersoning of ordinary citizens. This should be chilling to anybody.
So I think that something to kind of recognize here and something to talk about, because I've never specifically heard anyone frame the question I'm about to ask like this, is social media. Would we categorize social media under privileges or rights? Because, and there's arguments both for and against, because social media has now become public spaces. And it's not only like public forums, but it really is a public space. Many people utilize social media to network and to communicate with their friends and family, and it's a public space. However, I also recognize that social media companies are private organizations, on quotation marks. But that drives the question to where, because they're private organizations, do these private organizations have any right to thrust people off of their platform? Or because they're public spaces, do they have no right to thrust people off of their platforms? Obviously, unless people are actually, life-threatening behavior. That's a little different. But do they have any right to thrust people off of their platforms because they're public spaces?
Well, that's they specifically sought protection from Congress as a non-publisher, meaning they're not responsible for the content on these websites because they are indeed a platform, or so they were initially represented. Platform implies public square. However, I have yet to run into anyone on the left online, and I do spend some time engaging there. And of all the people I encounter, and these are open Marxists, they aren't at all free market capitalists.
Yeah.
They all chant the same ridiculous line, private company, private company. They're being completely disingenuous.
It is pretty disingenuous, because although these companies started out as private companies, they don't recognize that they are public forums, public spaces. And they also don't recognize that these companies have shareholders. So I don't necessarily think that these companies are private companies. When I think of and this could just be my ignorance, but when I think of a private company, I think of a mom and pop shop. I think of a small owned business. I don't think of a corporation, a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation. That's not a private company. That's That's a corporation that almost entirely dictates over our government by how powerful they are at this point.
That's the other thing, is that when you create a monster that's strong enough to literally intercept communications from a sitting president of the United States and round file those before they get to the intended target of the public, that is not only demonstrating that they have more power than any government on earth, but it's also outright treason. And if it weren't for having like the Millie and the general that's literally promised to give a heads up to China if we had any, if we had any military action planned, this guy under any normal society would have been exited from the military and probably from the earth for that very clear treason. Much like that, the jack-off Twitler, his buddy, Mother Zuckerberg, would have been rounded up in the night in their pajamas and handcuffs and taken out for treason for intercepting communications from a sitting president, were it not for an overriding power that's behind the scenes of our government. And so the public needs to, they've been given plenty of evidence that the government is bigger than the president and the Congress and the elected officials. The government is an entrenched bureaucracy of a certain quality of individual that basically are connected with the WEF and the World Health Organization and all these other, and the UN and other insidious organizations that have an agenda that is completely at odds with any notions of freedom that we might have celebrated in America. On that note, we're going to go to break quickly, and then I'm going to share a little more information about the experience of censorship, the implications, and we'll, of course, hear more from Destiny on her perspective. And we're back on a date with Destiny. During the break, we received one of us received kind of a response to an Instagram post, and Destiny is going to share it with you now.
All right. So first, let me start off by saying I have multiple Instagrams, and one of my Instagrams is more of a personal account that I post my own political ideas on, and I get about anywhere between 50 to 100 viewers on my story a day. That's not a lot of people in the grand scheme of things, and I don't have a grandiose amount of influence. So this is really just me communicating with people I know around me and putting my thoughts and opinions out there. So today I shared a study by Evie, not sure how it's pronounced. It goes Evie Magazine. And the study says, and the post says, study shows very masculine men are more likely to be happy and married. Masculine men report a higher income and education, a healthier weight, and increased general happiness and life satisfaction. So this post is very clearly, obviously, referring to masculinity as in estrogen versus testosterone. At least to me, it's common sense that that's what they're indicating. So they're probably talking about men who work out, who eat a lot of meat, who have high testosterone levels, and very traditional, stereotypical masculine traits. But the person who responded to me, without giving any of their personal information away, responds saying, "How does one measure quote unquote masculinity in a study? This is hilarious." I'm not going to repeat the rest of their response because that might give away too much of their personal life. So I responded in even though the article is clearly indicating masculinity as in estrogen and testosterone, I opted to respond in a different sense. So this is what I said. Traditional masculinity, a role of authority within a family without being a bully, a calling to defend family, community, and nation from internal and external threat, putting women and children first when it comes to prioritizing their well-being and safety. Real masculinity is being the best you can be to women and children, uplifting women but also maintaining your own personal growth and composure, Obviously, there's no such thing as a perfect man. We all have traits we're working on, but there's also no such thing as a man being completely masculine without any aspect of feminine energy. There is always a balance. The balance between masculine and feminine energy is sacred and needs to be prioritized. So groups of people don't off balance to one side more than the other, just like the feminist movement is doing now. I'm not going to repeat the rest of my response because it's more of a respond to their personal life. But what really aggravates me about this is, one, I'm obviously a traditional conservative woman with traditional values. I don't appreciate how, for me, posting something about masculinity, all of a sudden people on the left see that as an attack. For what reason? Why do you see me posting about masculinity as a threat or an attack on you? Are you trying to tell me that you think that feminine energy is more important than masculine energy? Are you trying to tell me that you think that femininity should be prioritized over masculinity within both women and men? I don't think that that's the case. I think that that's a really toxic thought and behavior. And perhaps maybe this particular person thought that I was saying, well, I think men should just be burly. I mean, like, obviously, yeah, I like men who are burly, but that's not the case at all. There needs to be a balance between feminine and masculinity within our entire world, or else we're just going to end up like with how the feminist movement is now. Men are completely demasculated. Testosterone levels are way down. I don't know. I just saw this as like they thought I was attacking them, and it's just irritating and aggravating how people on the left don't allow us, conservatives or women, to express how we enjoy masculinity just because their personal definition of masculinity is toxic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually extremely sensible. And the notion that there's a one-sided game, and the left always plays one-sided games, that masculinity has to be a topic of indictment and ridicule. And, you know, there's really no such thing as toxic masculinity, nor is there toxic femininity. We as humanity are a yin and yang, two different components that interact ideally well together. But the agitators of the left, who openly state their goals of dismantling capitalism and the family unit, are all about agitation. So they exploit any of the unsatisfactory relationships or experiences with the other sex, well, in a one-sided manner, as a basis to basically wage war on one gender over the other. I mean, it's part of cultural Marxism. Has to be originally the old Karl Marxism was about the haves and the have-nots, the proletariat, the bourgeoisie. They had to create a hostility between groups of people.
Yeah.
Then there was a guy, Marcuse and Adorno, that are from the Frankfurt School, and these are just vile communists from the Nazi days of Germany, that improved on Marxism, if improvement in quotes. And so they presented us with the 2.0 of Marxism that replaces the paradigm and the struggles of haves versus have-nots with a larger, with a larger struggle between ever-narrowing groups of individuals based on immutable and control characteristics and behavioral inclinations. So now it's gay versus straight. There's the 31 genders versus the 2 genders. There's Christianity versus Islam. Islamophobia and homophobia are words that they use to create and drive wedges between us, to get everyone mad at each other, so that instead of humanity basically maybe getting along a little bit with their neighbors and hearing out different ideas and points of view, which goes back to our censorship concept, that they have more conversation. And from conversation comes learning. Knowledge is power. The elites don't really want us to have it. So the elites want us fighting, and they want us balkanized and tribalized into ever-narrowing factions of people that are mad at one another.
Yeah.
And while we do that, while we play their game, they're able to reach in and rob us all blind, not just of our savings or our earnings and assets, of our families, of our entire way of life. And none of it's a secret. It's not in any way just a theory when the conspirators actively tell you what they're doing.
Actively as well. Like people, I swear to Bob, it's so blatantly obvious. Like there are websites you can go to, World Economic Forum. There are CEOs who present TED Talks and speeches in other columns and forums who are blatantly obvious about this. And yet when it's mentioned or brought up, I swear it like triggers people. People are like, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, it sure is a conspiracy, but it's not a theory.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, there's no denying the signature and the footprint that they're making is so large now. There's no denying the driving force behind a lot of these agendas.
Yeah.
And but ultimately, just before we go back on to censorship, I'm also a traditionalist in that I believe the best a man can be is what he is to his woman, and the best a woman can be is what she is to a man. Mm-hmm. Now that I realize today that can be wildly upsetting and triggering to an increasing portion of a fringe that's being nurtured in the population. And but so be it. I should also mention that my online experience with the left is one where they're the most hateful and most hostile. Anytime I present a position online, I'm rather diplomatic about it. Now, I might do a little bit of the 1-minute manager approach where I kind of smack them upside the head first just to kind of gather their attention. But as soon as they show any inclination or willingness to engage in a real conversation, then I, as one observer described of my approach online, I kill them with kindness. And we should all try to do that a little bit. And one of my accounts that I established probably 5 or 6 years ago is called League of Men Voters. Now, it's not a chauvinist club. It doesn't exclude women like the corresponding name of the League of Women Voters, which is much more exclusionary of anybody but left-leaning women. So my entire point was to start a conversation to kind of do a word play on their own name and use it against them. And I've received quite a few accolades, including just yesterday. I was very pleased to get this shout out from one account on Getter that's called America's Man's Man.
League of Men Voters, it's your general in the culture war. America's Man's Man. Go men.
So I appreciate any of that kind of encouragement. But the point again is society isn't supposed to be a war between men and women.
No.
We are all humanity. And humanity is tricked into giving up all of our rights by an elite that wants us to be focused on some real or imagined injustice across demographic lines, whether it be sex, race, proclivities, income, earning potential, intact families versus smashed families. It always has to be this against that.
Yeah.
And that tribalistic, that the exploitation of the diversity of situation, complexion, attitudes is a tool that by getting tricked or caught up in it makes the participants tools in a larger game that nobody really wins except for the ruling elite.
That was very well put. Yeah. I think when it comes to this issue of the traditional masculinity or femininity is, well, the article completely said, like, masculine men are more likely to have higher paying jobs and be happy and married. So I don't understand why that this person felt like it was an attack. Because, like, maybe it's the same for masculine women. maybe masculine women are more likely to have higher paying jobs.
Well, that actually speaks directly against the leftism is based on complex house of cards, and it's built on cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
They embrace wildly incompatible ideas to support their notions and their programming. And the cat has something to say about that too.
He's got some ideas on this.
But back to before we kind of continue on man and woman, I did want to share with you a little bit about the battle I'm facing with LinkedIn, and I also noticed another of my contacts, a gentleman, Drew Blair, that's extremely intelligent man. He's an expert on, like, an energy expert. He like travels the world and interacts with extremely important people about energy technology. So if you want to trust the science, his opinion might matter somewhat. But he was basically relying on LinkedIn, and he even paid for their gold level subscription so that so he's using it to its fullest. He got taken down twice, and he's getting nowhere in his response. And to this date, I was promised that if I submitted personal information, and I shouldn't have made that deal with the devil. It's like, oh, send in a picture of your driver's license to make sure it's you, and then we'll consider your appeal. This is an absolute lie and a fraud. I've been on LinkedIn since 2007 or 2008. I've had my career that's listed there involves contacts and reviews from people I've worked with in the 90s. Okay. So they have no wonder. They're not scratching their head about whether I'm a legitimate player on their platform. So they're just playing a little game, firewalling to see, well, maybe they won't want to do that, and then they go away, and it's one more voice we don't like, upsetting the message that we want to convey to people. And this was a career development site in the beginning. So it's really not even supposed to be about politics. And the only time that I've ever mentioned anything that concerns politics is responding to the vitriol that's spewed by the left, that's defamatory against Trump and all of his supporters. And this is all over. I mean, LinkedIn has become a sewer. What, again, was a job development site. But nonetheless, if people really think that it benefits their professional career to take a hard stance on political matters, it's kind of their right. Maybe they can have some rules against bullying, but they don't. And the bullies are the people that I responded to. Their accounts are still up. Meanwhile, my entire list of professional contacts I'm barred from access. They've destroyed my entire database of professional contacts. They've also destroyed my work history and my online resume, and there's a defamatory aspect of it as well. So if there are any attorneys in the office that like to take up that kind of case against a corporation of that size, I'm all about it. But it should also be noted that Hoffman is the founder of LinkedIn. And he might not be as well known as Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Google, Jack Dorsey, but he's at the center of the tech elite and often known as the most connected man in Silicon Valley. Now, he's outspoken about politics in the United States and what he regards as the rising authoritarianism in America. Mm-hmm. He's mastered the art of cooperation with authoritarian Beijing. And this is actually drawn directly from the new book, Red Handed, which I can highly recommend. But nonetheless, he's basically acting, he's been proven to be acting in service of the Chinese government. Also, it's important to note that Microsoft has obtained LinkedIn. And so this is also directly under the umbrella of the social media Taliban that's run by the likes of Bill Gates, and all the other authoritarians. And now, of course, Twitter got rid of Jackoff to replace that with an even more insidious pro-censorship advocate. And we'll get into that a little bit more after the break. Did you have anything you wanted to add about your own thoughts on that?
No, I don't have any problems. I haven't quite had any problems on social media yet, because the only social media that I use
is a...
Oh.
My apologies.
That's all right. I really only use Instagram, and I only use it to post stories. I very rarely post pictures. I don't really use any other social medias. But I know that a lot of other people experience the problem. And I know that if I were to start posting regularly about my political views, I know I would have problems. It's just not something I've experienced quite yet.
Well, apart from your debut podcast.
Yeah, except for our podcast last week, which was annoying.
Yep. So that's, we need to recognize censorship for what it is. There's three forms of lying. The first lying that Democrats do all day is basically just spewing things that simply aren't true. Sometimes they don't know whether they're true or not because they have a habit of knowing so much more than they'll ever develop in any kind of curiosity to begin a process of actual learning. The next form of lying is bearing false witness, like the Kavanaugh trial and Lisa Blasey Ford, where absolute inventions are created to defame. And a larger set of us have experienced another form of that, and that's where the left call everybody that disagrees with them as racists and Nazis. And those are extremely hurtful, defamatory comments that are so upsetting to most Americans that they wind up kowtowing and wound up, backing up and or like vanishing or withering away as soon as these tactics are deployed against them, because it's so alien to everything that they know themselves to be. And, being called racist, Nazi, and all these things, for many people is just extremely upsetting. I've become so used to these kind of antics that I take it as more of an opportunity to call them out for their projecting and their habit of bearing false witness as a routine business. And in fact, one time I was literally suspended 30 days on Facebook for being called a Nazi. So I encountered this guy. I had the audacity to mention Soros, who literally began his illustrious career working for Adolf and seizing assets from Jews in Germany. That's how George Soros began his career. He's described it in his own written works. He's described it on televised interviews. So in an age when most boys might have a paper route, this dude was enjoying a big power trip. And the worst thing is that when he describes this experience, he literally declares it the happiest time of his life because he felt such power during this. So it's like, gee, I guess it's nice that he's honest about that. But anyway, I dared to call out this guy for his insidious engagement in politics in America and globally. And this guy decides that means, that must mean anti-Semitism. I'm like, well, gee, I love Mark Levin. I love Dr. Laura. I love Michael Savage. So, yeah, I'm an anti-Semite because I don't like Soros. Okay. So he declared that he was going to continue to call names at me, like with this ridiculous defamatory thing that the left loves to do all day. Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. So he announced that he was going to call me that and continue to call me that. So I'm like, okay, what can I do about your, what can I do about your lying other than to answer? So he does it again. He goes, Nazi, in a one-word response. My response that earned me 30 days in Facebook jail was, you've already introduced yourself. So, yeah, we're going to go we're going to go to break and stay tuned.
The deep state is a conspiracy theory it's defined as the people within the U.S. government and military who are in secret control of government policy. Secret? Please, people. The deep state is those people within the U.S. government that are career employees that cannot be fired by people that we elect, by the Congress or the President. There are the FCC, the CIA, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the IRS. Are these people in control? Can they enact laws? Fuck yes. They're called regulations. For every law that Congress passes, and we elect Congress to pass our laws, there are 20 regulations enacted by federal agencies that have far more impact on our lives than anything Congress can possibly pass. Is there a deep state? Yes. Can we fire these people? No. Can presidents fire them? No. It's designed that way so that political parties and political interests cannot affect the deep state. Do you understand the nightmare of our situation, people? I'm sorry. It's not secret. It's as open as anything could be. In the past, since 1975, 200,000 regulations have been passed by our federal agencies, encompassing 800,000 pages of fine print. People, it is no secret. It is as open as it can be. The deep state does control America. Wake up, people, please. God, use some common fucking sense. Thank you.
Okay, and I've learned that we have a limited time on today's program. So I did want to wrap up with a couple thoughts, because we were talking about what censorship is. That's become, unfortunately, all too popular. The left now rationalize it using unlikely excuses like, oh, it's a private company, when none of them believe in private companies. None of them believe companies have any rights, except for maybe Pfizer, to basically force you to take their product, their free product, to the tune of $35 billion in profits one year and $29 billion projected for this year in their booster business. So it's really boosting the bottom line for them. But those are the only corporations that the left, or the companies that the left, respect. They despise small business unless it's, women. Women-owned, black-owned, this and that. It's like, gee, how about just grading businesses on what they offer and treating the ones that treat you well as a customer accordingly with some respect? Wouldn't that be neat? But they're all opposed to those kind of that kind of fairness, and a colorblind society as envisioned by the great and late MLK is really offensive to the left, that are now promoting segregation, and basically it's the Democrats up to their own tricks again. But censorship is the worst form of lying. Again, you have the regular lying that, some do all day long. Then you have the bearing false witness, which is literally defaming someone's character and could potentially, like if you do it in a courtroom, could put an innocent man in jail or on death row. And then the last form of lying is the most evil, and that's censorship. That's when you're saying that you have so little respect for other human beings that it's okay to rob them of what they might say or might have said. Mm-hmm. I mean, to tape, everyone has to be able to vote, but to tape people's mouths shut so they're not even able to express what would motivate a vote in one direction or another. There's no bigger lie than basically the assertion that this opinion never existed. And that's what censorship is.
There's a quote by Tyrion Lannister from the show Game of Thrones. If you rip out a man's tongue, you're not proving him a liar, but proving that you only fear what he might say.
that's an extremely good point and an appropriate use of that quote. And I love Game of Thrones, and I used to watch it with great interest because it was my kind of a way to study, for me, Democrat policy. No, but okay. So no, anyway,
That's funny. I just got that.
but the one note I want to give to the CIA, Google, and their ScrewTube is that this show is a show about opinions. If we were giving somebody else's opinion but our own, I'm not sure what the point would be. And even if we were inclined to do an infomercial for the New World Order, hell, none of us have lunch with WHO, the World Health Organization. None of us would really be able to decipher which of their contradictory statements are the official accepted position today, even if we wanted to run an infomercial for them as an organization. So that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to start a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we say something that's incorrect, which is possible,
Totally.
then it's an opportunity for people in the comments to say, hey, this actually isn't right, and here's why. And then we'll either defend that position or we'll accept new information. And so what I've always stated as my goal whenever I've been interacting online or anywhere else is to teach what I believe I know, and more ideally, to learn what I've yet to discover.
Completely agreed. I completely agree with that, because I am under the impression for my own mind is that I still have a lot of learning to do. Obviously, I have my own opinions, and I've based my opinions off of personal experiences or previous indoctrination. But I still have a lot of learning to do. And when I express my opinion, if there's some piece of information that is given to me that I think will change my opinion, well, then I will be changing my opinion. In fact, it's happened quite a lot recently in my life where there's been a specific instant where I've thought something serious about a certain event and someone else expressed a different perspective or a different value, and I was able to take that into account and take that into consideration and recognize, oh, well, maybe this isn't what I initially thought it was to be in the first place. And I think that we could all use a little bit of that. And the fact that censoring a small show like ourselves, or like this show that we're trying to do, just proves how evil big tech is, because it's like we're just two small people putting our opinions out there. And if you're so afraid of that, what are you hiding?
Exactly right. And there's power behind the private companies, as they're called. It's actually a partnership between the government. All of these companies are intimately connected, so it's crony capitalism at its finest.
Yeah, isn't that corporatism? And it kind of irritates me that people are always bashing on capitalism when we're clearly living in corporatism currently.
Yep, and any doubts about that argument were whisked away by Sucky Saki when she went up on the microphone and specifically stated that they're working with these social media monopolies, aka social media Taliban, to increase the levels of censorship.
Yeah.
And that's where the left likes to use this argument. Oh, the First Amendment is only against censorship from the government. Guess what? Free speech is actually a beneficial aspect of a society. We live in a society. Free speech is a good thing. And being intruded upon by government or something even stronger than government is kind of immaterial. But nonetheless, even if it's a private company, they do have a right to create a web page. And when they created a platform, that means it's a public square. If they don't like platforms, they can start a private web page and call it a publisher. And then they can do stupid moderation to block out any opinions they don't like all day and long, and nobody has a complaint because it's like, well, it's their web page. But that's not what we were presented with Twitter nor Facebook. It was presented as better internet And the entire first 10 years of it functioned perfectly well. From 2007 to 2017, I never ran into a single problem. And then that was quickly followed by 2 collectively years of Facebook jail. Same person, same attitude, same opinions, same style of communication. I did nothing differently. I violated no legitimate terms of service. And all it is a game to rig every conversation just as hard as they rig elections. And with that, we're going to close today's show. Please do stay tuned. We'll be back Tuesday of this coming week. And we'll kick off April with, we might even have a guest other than the cats on that one. And thanks again for joining, and good afternoon.